Welcome to Canadian Justice. I'm Christine Van Gyn, and today we're discussing a recent controversy at the Toronto District School Board. Criminal lawyer Marie Henein is one of Canada's best-known criminal lawyers. She's been featured as a guest speaker for many public events. She's acted as a defense lawyer in some of Canada's highest-profile criminal trials, including the trial of former CBC radio host Jian Ghomeshi, who was charged with and ultimately acquitted of sexual assault. Ms. Henein wrote a book about her life and career as a criminal defense lawyer called Nothing But the Truth. The book was proposed for a book club event series hosted by the Toronto District School Board. But the TDSB told the book club organizer that Ms. Henein's book was not suitable because Ms. Henein had defended Jian Ghomeshi and, to quote, "How do you explain that to little girls?" This incident shows a very core misunderstanding of the role of criminal defense counsel and the role they play in the justice system and in society. And we want to talk about that. Here today to discuss this are three legal experts: criminal lawyers Rachel Lichtman and Trevin David, and lawyer and academic Omar Haradai. Thank you all so much for joining me today. Now let's start with initial reactions. Rachel, I'll start with you. Your reaction to the TDSB's decision not to promote this book club event.
Thank you, Christine. So honestly, I was disgusted, appalled, and very angered when I heard this. And the reason for that is because we're hearing from a board that's in charge of educating our youth and the next generation that they really have no education on what a democratic society is and how important the role of the criminal defense lawyer is in upholding and maintaining a democratic society. I think what they very clearly missed here is that it's defense lawyers that are protecting all Canadians' rights to make sure we all have those rights. Without that very zealous advocacy, you're going to find yourself in a system that's a dictatorship and has complete police power. And tomorrow, when your neighbor isn't getting along with you and they call the police and make an allegation against you, you're going to be thrown in jail. The key is going to be thrown away, and there's not going to be anyone to stand up for you. So to see how they very clearly missed that is so upsetting. And the funniest thing is, her book has nothing to do with her war stories or Jian Ghomeshi. Her book is an extremely inspirational story about an immigrant woman, about a woman who felt like she didn't fit what society wanted her to be, but she stepped into herself, and in doing that, found her success. So their decision really gets to the root of what upsets me, gets to the root of who I am. I'm a defense lawyer that believes in the system, and I'm a woman that a lot of times feels the same way as how Marie picked, as written in her book, doesn't fit the role of exactly what society wants me to be. So it's extremely upsetting to me.
Very well put, Rachel. Trevin, your initial reaction as well.
Firstly, thanks so much, Christine, for having me. I think I agree exactly with what Rachel said. I think we can recognize that the Toronto District School Board doesn't have to support a particular book for any reason, but it's really the why that is so difficult to understand here. Because as Rachel said, this isn't just about Ms. Henein and representing the Ghomeshi case, or her work in representing Mr. Ghomeshi. It's about that lived experience of her as that young immigrant woman breaking into a profession that was primarily made up of white men. And I think that is actually a particularly interesting underdog story that many people, especially young women in the Toronto District School Board, would love to listen to. And I think instead that critique that you heard, that because she represented someone that someone doesn't like or believes to be unpopular, that anything she had to say, any of her opinions or any of that experience that she had, which I think a lot of people can identify with, does not matter anymore. I think really sort of was the worst part for me to understand, and the worst part for me to accept with the Toronto District School Board's decision.
Omar, we've got about 30 seconds. Your quick take on reaction to this.
I think it's illustrative of a broader phenomenon where we're seeing that increasingly the difficult questions, perhaps the questions that need to be asked the most within our educational system, are being shut down. This particular issue hit close to home because in the legal industry, we know how important the criminal defense lawyers are to all of our freedoms and all of our liberties. And so I think that is really the concern here for me in terms of what we're doing in education.
We've got to go to commercial. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Canadian Justice, where we're discussing a Toronto District School Board decision not to promote a book written by criminal defense lawyer Marie Henein and the role of defense counsel in society. So, Omar, why do you think there is sort of this fundamental misunderstanding of the role of defense lawyers, not just at the TDSB, not just at the school board, but I think this is a broader misunderstanding?
It's a broader misunderstanding because Canadians like to believe in our justice system and law enforcement, and we should. But what we don't like to acknowledge perhaps as readily is that mistakes happen. And so as much as we see in media depictions, lots of individuals who are, let's say, celebrated in doing bank heists and robberies and things like that in movies and TV shows, we have a lot less TV shows and movies about the individual who was framed or set up, or just quite frankly, due to sloppy police work, an individual is wrongfully accused and perhaps even wrongfully convicted. And so I think that's part of the story that we just don't recognize and understand, knowing how important criminal defense lawyers are in ensuring that we're not wrongfully locked up and put away in jail.
Now, Rachel, this misunderstanding of the broader public about the role of defense counsel, it matters. So how does public opinion play into the lives and careers of defense lawyers, criminal defense lawyers, especially when most criminal defense lawyers don't have the power and position of a high-profile lawyer like Marie Henein? Most of the work that most criminal defense lawyers do is with legal aid in really challenging conditions. So what does the negative public perception do to that work? Does it make it harder? Do you just kind of grin and bear it? What role does it play?
Of course, it makes things harder. And you know what? I had a student that was shadowing me for a day, and he came to court with me. He was a high school student. And everything from he saw in the courthouse, he was like, it seems like you guys are treated like less than as compared to the Crown. And I'm like, yeah, we are. So it definitely is more difficult. We're treated differently in the courtrooms. We're treated differently by the public. But to me, the most concerning thing is that it's politics plays a role in this. So after the Ghomeshi case, the government didn't like the public outcry. So to appease the public, they created laws that are dubbed the Ghomeshi laws, highly unconstitutional. They've been said to be unconstitutional at multiple different superior courts throughout Ontario. And soon we're going to be getting a Supreme Court of Canada judgment on that. But it's not just that it makes our jobs more difficult. It's not just that we're treated differently by the public in the courts and sometimes by judges as well. But it's that unfortunately, politicians who don't have an appreciation for the Constitution, which they should, are creating unconstitutional laws and making it very hard for accused persons to defend themselves at all when they're charged with any kind of sexual assault offenses.
Yeah, those laws, I think it's in a case called JJ. It's at the Supreme Court. It's being decided right now. It was already argued. And we're going to be doing an episode about that case actually in a few weeks. Trevin, there was an op-ed in the Globe and Mail about this TDSB incident written by Ottawa professor Carissima Mathen. And she used an excellent quote from the late Eddie Greenspan, a legendary criminal defense lawyer who I know that you and Rachel both know. The quote was when he was asked, when he was asked, does it ever bother you defending people you know are guilty? He replied, if I defended crimes, maybe it would, but I don't defend crimes. I only defend innocent people. Until they're found guilty, there are no other kinds of people for me to defend. So you worked for Eddie. How do you feel about that quote? And how do you feel about your role? How would you answer that question?
I think, Ed, I'd say no one answers that as well as Mr. Greenspan did. And I think it goes to that sort of idea that sometimes people think that the lawyer is defending, by the lawyer defending a certain person, that they're condoning the allegations or they're condoning a particular crime having taken place. And that's completely beside the point. We defend the presumption of innocence and we defend our clients who are charged with often very serious and heinous allegations, and we guard against wrongful convictions because it's often one of those things that wrongful convictions only become apparent in hindsight. If you look at a case like the famous wrongful conviction of Guy Paul Moran, it had a sympathetic victim, a 9-year-old girl, and a person that seemed reclusive, who didn't participate in the search or attending her funeral. And it resulted in the first time he was acquitted, was roundly criticized by the media and by the public. And we now know that Mr. Moran was fully innocent of the charges. So even something that very serious charges like a sex assault or murder can still result in wrongful convictions.
Welcome back to Canadian Justice, where we're discussing a recent controversy at the Toronto District School Board, where the board refused to promote an event about a book by criminal defense lawyer Marie Henein. And we're talking about the role of criminal defense lawyers in society more broadly. Rachel, I want to ask you about what this message sends to girls. Girls considering careers in law, especially because this is a male-dominated field. What do you have to say about that?
It's telling them that there are jobs that they can and can't have, and that there are jobs that society says they can do and they can't do. And I think Marie Henein herself put it best. She was asked in an interview right before her book was released, that people say that you betrayed your gender, you betrayed your sex when you defended Jian Ghomeshi. And she responded and said, nobody would ever dare say that to a man in any kind of circumstance. And it's true. And it's not a betrayal of anyone's gender. It has nothing to do with females or feminism. It has to do with believing in the justice system, with believing in the rights that we're afforded in our system. I think also that people also completely disregard or forget the actual decision in the Ghomeshi case and what happened there and the evidence there. And that was that there was evidence that these different complainants were colluding. And they denied it and they lied about it. They lied multiple times on the stand. So people forget that as well. But it's a horrible message. And for the Toronto District School Board to be endorsing sexism, very upsetting.
So Rachel, how would you say that we make a career path to criminal defense law more accessible to women? If we want more women to have the ability to pursue that path, how do we make that possible?
I think, first of all, stop demonizing women for doing their job. Stop saying that women can't do certain things. But I think that just educating the general public, and of course our students that are really our future, educating them on what it means to be a defense lawyer and the importance of that role within society is, of course, going to attract people, and including females, to the profession, because it's an amazing thing to be a part of.
Now, Trevin, you practice criminal law. You're a man, but I know that you have female partners, female lawyers that you work with. Do you think that there is a difference between how male and female criminal defense lawyers are treated?
I think that is something, ultimately, criminal defense law or law still reflects society. And we have to recognize that there are double standards. And when Rachel talks about the questions that are asked of Marie, that's a very real problem that that women have to deal with on a daily basis. And so I think that, to kind of go back to that question about what we can do to amplify that, is amplifying someone like Marie's experience and having her come and talk about this shows women not only that they can belong in professions that they might not otherwise think that they belong in, but also that they can fundamentally be themselves and excel in a way that perhaps no one else can. Marie can do things because of who she is and her personality that perhaps I as a man might not be able to do. And she has a unique strength, and that's what makes her such an excellent defense lawyer. So I think that that's something that also needs to be taken into account, and why it becomes even more important to have more women in the defense bar and in law in general.
Omar, I want to get your take on all of this, on what Rachel and Trevin have said, and if you think sexism played a part in this decision by TDSB.
I think Marie Henein is just a great lawyer. She's widely respected by her peers, the entire profession. She's just very, very good at what she does. And she got there through hard work. I think that's a story that does need to be told to young girls. but to young boys and, quite frankly, to everybody. Having spent most of my childhood in the TDSB, I can say that being a lawyer, aspiring to be a lawyer, really was not something that was cultivated in any way. And so I think, if anything, we need to have more of those perspectives with our education system rather than try to censor or remove those types of role models from interacting with students directly.
Yeah, Trevin, what role do you think that public education and the TDSB has in teaching students about the role of lawyers in the system? Just about 30 seconds.
And I think I'll say we don't need the critiques or questions about the role of defense lawyers are important. We don't need a round of applause to be considered heroes. But I think just understanding the role that we play and the value that we provide and having those discussions is part of something that is very important in helping enhance public understanding of that. And I think that's something that we don't defend the crime or we defend the presumption of innocence is really something that needs to be reinforced more and more.
We got to go to commercial, but we'll be right back. Welcome back to Canadian Justice, where we're discussing a recent controversy at Toronto District School Board. The school board decided not to promote an event involving criminal defense lawyer Marie Henein. And this shows like a fundamental misunderstanding of the role of defense lawyers at the school board, and I think more broadly in society. Now, I did try to get a Crown attorney to come on today's episode, a prosecutor, because privately I have heard from Crowns who were also pretty disturbed by what happened with this book with TDSB. Unfortunately, the pretty bureaucratic nature of the government meant I wasn't able to get a Crown to come on. But without naming names, Rachel, what type of things have you been hearing in the criminal bar, on the prosecutor side about this incident and about the Crown's perception of defense counsel? I know they don't hate you guys.
No, and the best kind of crown is a crown that is reasonable. Those are the crowns that defense lawyers are most worried about because they do the best job. But our justice system is comprised of an adversarial system, right? It's the Crown and it's the defense, and we both advocate as hard as we can to come to whatever the conclusion is of that case. And defense lawyers need prosecutors, and prosecutors need defense lawyers. And all Crowns I've ever spoken to that are respectable and good Crowns say, we need you guys. You're an integral role of the system. And so I haven't spoken to any Crowns specifically on this issue, but from all my discussions with them to date, I know that they would be horrified by hearing this because they're members of the justice system. We're members of the justice system. We all need each other. It doesn't work if you remove one of the categories. They don't demonize us and we don't demonize them.
Trevin, what have you been hearing from prosecutors about this incident or more broadly?
I think it goes to that larger concern because Crowns ultimately have two hats. They have their own personal opinions, but they also represent the ministers of justice. They're there to make sure that justice is done, whatever that looks like. And I think they understand more than anyone else the value that defense lawyers have and how necessary that role is in the system. So when you hear a decision like this from the school board, it cuts at that very core, shows that misunderstanding of the role that defense lawyers have. And I think no one, certainly not prosecutors, have any interest in perpetuating that and would want to see that be addressed and that sort of misunderstanding from the TDSB be corrected. So I think that's something I've from my own conversations with Crowns, I've heard that myself.
Now, Omar, your take on this, what have you been hearing from the other side?
I'm going to expand a little bit on what Rachel and Trevin said. And it's true, it's an adversarial system, but it's adversarial in its evidence. And Trevin mentioned that Crown prosecutors are ministers of justice. And we have a very, very old Supreme Court of Canada case from 1954, the Queen and Boucher, where the court was very clear that Crown prosecutors are not there to win or lose. They're not there even to get a conviction, which members of the public often don't understand. They're there to represent the state, to reflect the fact that something wrong has potentially occurred and present the evidence for that type of case. And so it's not unheard of where that evidence doesn't exist, that the Crown simply drops the case, and you would not find that in other aspects of the adversarial system within the legal system. So Crown Counsel, I would say, also have a very deep and profound respect for the role of defense, because without it, the system just doesn't work.
Trevin, we've got about 20 seconds. What message do you want to send to people? What do you want people to understand? Last message about the role of defense counsel and your thoughts on this case.
I think going back to what, when Marie said, this is not a misunderstanding, there are many ways to describe this. Misunderstanding is not one of them. I think it just goes to that very idea that we defend, and we always say this, we defend the presumption of innocence.
Trevin, we've got to go, but I want to thank all of you for your time.
Thank you.
We've heard today about what the Toronto District School Board has called a misunderstanding about a book club involving a high-profile criminal defense lawyer and some Toronto students. There was a misunderstanding. The TDSB misunderstands the fundamental role criminal defense lawyers play in achieving justice. Without zealous defense lawyers, those accused of crimes would simply face a march to conviction. Thanks for watching, and remember, a freer Canada starts with you.